The strobes turned the world into a nightmare of fractured snapshots. Red light, darkness, red light, darkness, each pulse like a heartbeat in hell. Smoke coiled through the corridor, thick as winter fog, acrid and choking. The alarm klaxon screamed at 110 decibels, a sound designed to shatter thought itself. Three bodies lay scattered across the concrete floor. Instructors, elite warriors, men who had survived wars and trained thousands. Now they were down, eliminated, their simulation vests glowing crimson in the strobing chaos. And in the center of it all stood a woman. Staff Sergeant Kira Ashford held her rifle in low-ready position, barrel angled toward the ground, finger indexed along the receiver. Her breathing came steady and controlled. 4 counts in, 8 counts out. Her heart rate held at 72 beats per minute. The smoke swirled around her boots like something alive. She had been alone for 9 seconds. 9 seconds was all it had taken. Her voice cut through the alarm calm as a lake at dawn. They taught me the quietest operator survives. Noise gets you killed. The red strobe flashed again, painting her face in crimson shadow. 72 hours earlier, I didn't make a sound. The October sun hung low over Fort Bragg, casting long shadows across the training complex. The air smelled of pine needles and gun oil, diesel exhaust and ambition. Somewhere in the distance, a cadence caller's voice echoed across the parade ground, rhythmic and relentless. The Jeep that rolled through the main gate was old. Desert tan paint faded to the color of dust. Dents in the quarter panels told stories the vehicle would never speak. It pulled into the parking lot of Training Facility 7 and shut off with a mechanical cough that suggested its best years were decades behind it. The driver's door opened. Staff Sergeant Kira Ashford stepped out into the Carolina heat. She was 29 years old and looked younger. 5'6", 130 pounds, with the kind of lean muscle that came from function rather than vanity. Her uniform was pressed to regulation perfection. Her boots shined to a mirror gloss that reflected the sky. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a tight bun that wouldn't move if a hurricane hit it. But it was the way she moved that would catch an observer's eye. She walked with an economy of motion that had suggested every step had been calculated, every movement stripped of waste. When she closed the Jeep door, it made almost no sound. When her boots hit the pavement, they whispered rather than stomped. She reached into the back seat and pulled out a single rucksack. Olive drab military issue worn at the corners. No patches, no unit identifiers, no stories written on its canvas skin. Everything she needed for the next 3 weeks fit inside that bag. Kira paused for 3 seconds, her eyes scanning the training facility compound. Her gaze moved in a deliberate pattern, left to right, ground to roofline, exits, and entrances. Her expression never changed, but behind her gray-green eyes, a catalog was being compiled. Security camera, northeast corner, 30-degree downward angle. Another camera, above the main entrance, covering the approach. Emergency exit, southwest side. Crash bar, opens outward. Instructor parking area, 6 vehicles. 4 personal, 2 government issue. Observation tower, gantry platform, elevated position with sightlines over the entire shoot house complex. She had been on the ground for 90 seconds and already knew more about the facility than most students would learn in 3 weeks. A voice called out from the entrance. "You lost Staff Sergeant." The man approaching was in his late 50s, built like he'd been carved from Wyoming granite and left to weather in the wind. 6 feet tall, broad through the shoulders, with a face that had seen too much sun and too many deployments. His salt and pepper hair was cut high and tight. His uniform bore the rank of Master Sergeant and a combat patch from the 75th Ranger Regiment. Master Sergeant Garrett Donovan had been running close quarters battle training at Fort Bragg for 15 years. Before that, he'd spent 23 years kicking doors in places the news didn't talk about until a decade later. He walked with a slight hitch in his left leg, a souvenir from Desert Storm, that only showed up when he was tired. Kira turned to face him, came to a loose parade rest. "No, Master Sergeant. Staff Sergeant Kira Ashford, reporting for advanced CQB course." Donovan's eyes narrowed slightly as he closed the distance. He had a handshake that tested people, firm enough to feel intention. Not so hard it became a contest. When he took Kira's hand, he noticed 2 things immediately. Her grip was solid, confident, not trying to prove anything. and her calluses were in the wrong places for a supply specialist. "You're early," he said, releasing her hand. "Course doesn't start until 0600 tomorrow." "Prefer to familiarize myself with the area, Master Sergeant. Get the lay of the land." "That right?" Donovan tilted his head slightly, studying her the way a jeweler might study a stone he couldn't quite identify. "You move economically, Staff Sergeant. Efficient. Don't see that much anymore. Where'd you train?" "Various places, Master Sergeant." It wasn't an evasive answer exactly, but it wasn't an open one either. Donovan made a small sound in the back of his throat, something between acknowledgement and curiosity. He pulled a small notepad from his cargo pocket, clicked a pen, made a notation. When he wrote, his hand moved with the same precision Kira had used to scan the compound. "Subject displays advanced spatial awareness," he wrote. "Recommend observation." He clicked the pen closed, returned the notepad to his pocket. "Billeting is in Building 12. You're in room 217, single occupancy. Briefing tomorrow, 0600 sharp. Don't be late." "Yes, Master Sergeant." Donovan started to turn away, then paused. "Ashford, was it?" "Yes, Master Sergeant." "You look familiar. We served together somewhere." "I don't believe so, Master Sergeant." He studied her face for another moment, then nodded slowly. "Must be mistaken." But his tone suggested he wasn't sure about that. "Welcome to Fort Bragg, Staff Sergeant. Hope you're ready to learn something." "I'm here to learn, Master Sergeant." Donovan walked away, that slight hitch in his stride, marking time like a metronome. Kira watched him go, her expression unchanged. But in the back of her mind, a small notation appeared in her own catalog. Master Sergeant Garrett Donovan. Observant, experienced, potentially witting to assignment parameters. She shouldered her rucksack and headed toward Building 12. By the time she reached her room, she had counted 17 more security cameras, mapped 12 exit routes, and memorized the patrol pattern of the MP walking the perimeter fence. She hadn't made a sound doing any of it. The briefing hall smelled like every briefing hall Kira had ever been in. Old coffee, cleaning solvent, the low-grade anxiety of trainees about to be tested. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead with that particular frequency that lives somewhere between annoying and maddening. 24 chairs arranged in 4 rows of 6. 23 were occupied by men in their 20s and 30s. Combat uniforms pressed, boots shined, rifles racked along the back wall in perfect alignment. Kira sat in the back row, far right seat. The position gave her a view of the entire room, the entrance, and the instructor's podium. Her data pad rested on her lap screen, dark. She was the only woman in the room. This was not new information. She had known she would be. The Advanced Close Quarters Battle Course had been running for 8 years. In that time, exactly 4 women had attempted it. 3 had passed. The 4th had quit after a training accident that left her with a fractured collarbone and a medical discharge. The men in the room were aware of her presence. She could feel their attention like heat on her skin, some curious, some dismissive, a few actively hostile. She gave them nothing in return, no acknowledgement, no challenge. Her face remained neutral, her posture relaxed but attentive. She simply existed in her space and waited for the instructors to arrive. The door at the front of the room opened with a bang that made half the trainees flinch. Sergeant Wade Holloway entered like he owned the building and was considering charging rent. He was 52 years old and looked like he'd been built by someone who thought bigger was always better. 6'3", 230 pounds, shoulders that strained the seams of his uniform. His chest was a billboard of badges and tabs. Airborne, air assault, expert infantry, and positioned dead center just above his name tape, a small rectangular patch that read Combat Master in gold lettering. His face was weathered from years in the sun lined around the eyes and mouth. His hair, still thick despite his age, was cut in a high fade that belonged to a man 20 years younger. He wore a neatly trimmed goatee that added a touch of civilian style to his military bearing. And when he walked with the confidence of a man who had never doubted his right to take up space. Holloway moved to the front of the room and turned to face the assembled trainees. He planted his feet shoulder-width apart, crossed his arms over his chest, and let his gaze sweep across the group like a lighthouse beam searching for ships in the dark. When his eyes landed on Kira, they paused for just a fraction of a second. Then they moved on. "Listen up." Holloway's voice was a Texas drawl filtered through gravel and cigarettes. Most of you won't make it through this course. That's not a threat. That's statistics. 70% washout rate. You might be studs in your units. You might have tabs and badges and letters of recommendation from generals. Don't mean shit here. He let that hang in the air for a moment. This course will teach you to operate in the worst environment you can imagine. Close quarters, limited visibility, no time to think, just time to react. And if you react wrong in the real world, you die. Your buddy dies. The mission fails. So we make it hard here so it's easier out there. Several trainees nodded. One in the front row sat up straighter. Holloway continued. I've been running CQB for 15 years. Before that, I was putting rounds down range when most of you were in elementary school. February 1991 tank battle outside Basra. That's where you learn who's real and who's pretending. His hand drifted unconsciously to the patch on his chest. The Combat Master Certification. I earned this through 2 weeks of intensive training with the best civilian tactical instructors in the country. Cost me $2,000 out of pocket. Why? Because I wanted to be the best. Because good enough isn't good enough when lives are on the line. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to something more intimate, more dangerous. You're here because someone thought you had potential. My job is to find out if they were right or if they were doing you a favor. And I don't do favors. In the back row, Kiera's fingers moved across her data pad. The screen remained dark, but beneath the surface, text was appearing in a secure note-taking application. Time 0607. Subject SGT Holloway Wade. Initial assessment alpha personality. Emphasis on personal credentials. Potential insecurity masked by external validation markers. The door opened again, and Master Sergeant Donovan entered, followed by 2 other instructors. Donovan carried a tablet and moved to the podium at the front of the room. Take your seats, Donovan said quietly. The room, which had been at attention, relaxed into chairs. Donovan's voice didn't carry the volume of Holloway's, but it cut through the space with the authority of a man who had earned respect rather than demanded it. Advanced Close Quarters Battle Course starts now, Donovan began. For the next 3 weeks, you will eat, sleep, and breathe room clearing. You will learn to read environments, identify threats, neutralize hostile forces while protecting friendly ones and any civilians caught in the crossfire. He tapped his tablet, and the large screen behind him flickered to life. A 3-dimensional holographic representation of a building rotated slowly. 4 stories, multiple entry points. A maze of corridors and rooms rendered in blue wireframe against a black background. This is Training Facility 7's modular shoot house, reconfigurable. We can change the layout daily. IEDs, hostages, armed resistance, environmental hazards. Everything you'll face in Fallujah or Kandahar, or the next place the brass decides needs American boots. The holographic building continued its slow rotation, each level peeling away to reveal the internal structure. Kira's eyes tracked the display with the focus of someone reading a technical manual. Her mind was already mapping angles, calculating fields of fire, identifying fatal funnels, and points of maximum danger. The building layout triggered something in her memory, a ghost of recognition. She had seen this configuration before, or something very close to it, but the context wouldn't come. Not yet. Today's scenario, Donovan continued, is a compromise high-value target extraction. Intel suggests 3 to 5 hostiles, light arms, potentially improvised explosive devices. Rules of engagement are strict. Positive identification is paramount. Collateral damage will be graded harshly. A ripple of nervous energy moved through the room, and then a sound cut through it like a knife through silk. A loud, deliberate sigh. Every head turned toward the source. Sergeant Holloway had shifted in his seat at the front row. He leaned toward the trainee next to him, a young corporal named Tad Brennan. Holloway's voice carried just far enough to reach the back rows, though he made it seem like he was speaking privately. Look at this, Holloway said, gesturing vaguely toward the screen. They're letting their port staff run the course now. Guess they gotta check those diversity boxes somehow. Brennan, 26 years old, with the kind of face that suggested he'd never learned to say no to a superior, snickered. The sound was nervous, uncertain, but it was there. Next to Brennan, specialist Reese Sullivan laughed a little louder. Sullivan was 24, built like a distance runner, with the kind of swagger that came from being pretty good at things but never great. The comment hung in the air like smoke from a grenade. They didn't look directly at Kira. They didn't have to. The target of the barb was unmistakable. She was the only woman in the final selection phase, the only one who didn't fit the pattern, and her quiet, unassuming presence made her an easy mark for barracks room bravado. Kira's expression did not change. Her eyes remained fixed on the holographic display tracing the corridors, noting the breach points, calculating the angles. She had heard the words. She had cataloged them. But she gave them no energy. Reacting was a waste of it. Master Sergeant Donovan's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Got a problem, Sergeant Holloway." The room fell silent. The kind of silence that happens when everyone suddenly becomes very interested in breathing quietly and not moving. Holloway straightened in his seat, his expression shifting from smug to parade ground professional in the space of a heartbeat. "No, Master Sergeant, just eager to get started." He puffed out his chest slightly, a peacock displaying his feathers. His hand tapped the combat master patch on his chest, as if drawing Donovan's attention to it. "I'm ready to put in the work. Show these trainees what right looks like." Donovan's eyes were chips of obsidian. They lingered on Holloway for 3 full seconds, long enough to make the moment uncomfortable. Long enough to make Brennan and Sullivan suddenly discover something fascinating about their own boots. "Hubris gets you killed, Sergeant," Donovan said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of 34 years in uniform. "Remember that." He turned back to the screen and continued his briefing as if the interruption had never happened. But in the back row, Kira's fingers moved across her data pad. UR 619, public disparagement. Context diversity program comment. Witnesses entire trainee class. Instructor response, verbal warning. Note, first data point. Pattern assessment pending. The briefing continued for another 30 minutes. Donovan outlined the schedule, the evaluation criteria, the standards for passing and failing. The other instructors chimed in with technical details about weapons, safety ammunition loads, medical protocols. Kira absorbed it all, her mind filing information into mental folders, cross-referencing details, building a 3-dimensional model of what the next 3 weeks would look like. She didn't take notes on the technical material. She didn't need to. That information was already locked in her memory, cataloged and indexed with the same precision she used for everything else. When the briefing ended, Donovan dismissed the class. "Gear up, Alpha Team, you're on deck for the first exercise. Be at the staging area in 15 minutes. The room erupted into motion. Trainees stood, grabbed their rifles from the rack, checked magazines, and sling tension. The energy shifted from passive attention to active preparation. As the crowd moved toward the door, Holloway and his crew made a deliberate path that took them past Kira's position. Holloway didn't touch her. That would have been actionable, but he crowded her space, moving close enough that she had to take a step back to avoid contact. His physical presence was aggressive, dominating, designed to intimidate. He looked down at her, his 6'3" frame giving him a full 9 inches of height advantage. His voice was low enough that only she and his 2 followers could hear. "Try to keep up, Staff Sergeant," he said. The words were coded in something that tried to sound like concern but came out as contempt. "Don't want you tripping over your own feet when the bullets start flying." Real or simulated? Kira met his gaze for exactly 1.5 seconds. Her eyes were calm, analytical, like a lens focusing, like a camera burning. She said nothing. The absence of a response seemed to irritate Holloway more than any retort would have. His jaw tightened. A muscle twitched near his left eye. He had thrown a punch and it had landed on empty air. He scoffed and shook his head and stalked toward the door. Brennan and Sullivan fell in behind him like remoras following a shark. The interaction had lasted 30 seconds, a minor ripple in the daily tide of military life. But it was the first data point, and Kira Ashford never ignored the data. The base library was a forgotten place. Built in the 1980s, updated never. It sat in a corner of Fort Bragg that saw little foot traffic. The building smelled of aging paper and industrial floor wax. The fluorescent lights buzzed with a frequency that suggested they were considering giving up entirely. It was late afternoon. Golden sunlight slanted through the windows, painting rectangles of light across empty tables. The only sounds were the quiet hum of the climate control system and the distant, rhythmic thud of helicopter blades from the airfield 2 miles away. Kira sat at a table in the far corner. The position gave her a clear view of the entrance and both emergency exits. Her back was to a wall, standard practice. Her datapad sat open in front of her screen, angled away from casual observation. Her fingers moved across the surface with practiced efficiency, typing without looking, her eyes fixed on the middle distance while her muscle memory did the work. She opened a secure personal log. The application required 3 separate authentication factors and would wipe itself clean if anyone tried to access it without proper credentials. A new entry appeared. Date October 12th. Location training facility, 7 Fort Bragg, NC. Time 14:07 hours. She paused, considering her next words carefully. Everything she wrote here would become part of a permanent record. Everything would be reviewed, analyzed, possibly used as evidence in official proceedings. Documentation was the first line of defense. Proof was the only weapon that left no residue. Incident, public disparagement with implied gender discrimination. Location, main briefing hall during initial course orientation. Individuals involved: Sergeant Wade Holloway, Primary Corporal Tad Brennan, Secondary Specialist Reese Sullivan, Tertiary. Statement: subject Holloway made comments suggesting female trainee presence represents quota fulfillment rather than merit-based selection. Exact quote. They're letting support staff run the course now. Guess they gotta check those diversity boxes somehow. Tone deliberately loud enough for trainee body and instructional staff to hear. Intent appears designed to undermine professional credibility and establish social hierarchy. Witness response: Corporal Brennan and Specialist Sullivan provided social reinforcement via laughter. Remaining trainee body remained silent. Master Sergeant Donovan issued verbal warning. Assessment. First contact establishes pattern of behavior. Subject Holloway demonstrates need for external validation and social dominance, likely to escalate if initial provocation fails to generate desired response. Tactical implication: team cohesion deliberately undermined prior to high-risk exercise. Potential safety concern if pattern continues. She stopped typing and switched applications. The screen now displayed the architectural schematics for Training Facility 7. She had downloaded them from the base Public Works database earlier that afternoon. The documents were technically restricted, but the restrictions were password protected with the same default credentials the Army had been using since 2008. She pulled up the shoot house floor plan and cross-referenced it with her mental notes from the morning reconnaissance. Camera placements appeared as small red dots on the schematic. 2 cameras in the briefing room, one covering the entrance, one covering the instructor podium. 2 cameras in the staging area. Wide angle covering gear storage and equipment prep zones. 16 cameras inside the shoot house structure itself. Multiple angles overlapping coverage designed to capture every corner of every room for after-action review. And 1 gantry-mounted observation camera designated G4 that provided a clear, unobstructed overhead view of the entire first floor. She highlighted the G4 camera feed in yellow. That would be the critical angle. The one that would show geometry and positioning without the distortion of ground-level perspective. The file was saved with encryption using a key she hadn't used in over 2 years. The process was automatic muscle memory from a different life, a different set of missions. She closed the datapad and sat in the silence for a long moment. Kira wasn't angry. Anger was a signal flare, bright and hot, and ultimately useless, an expenditure of energy that compromised your position and revealed your location to anyone watching. What she felt was something colder, a quiet sense of disappointment. The system was designed to forge warriors, not bullies. When it produced the latter instead of the former, a deviation had been noted, a failure in quality control, and failures required correction. She stood, gathered her datapad, and walked toward the exit. Her boots made almost no sound on the library's tile floor. Outside, the October sun was sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Soldiers moved across the base in the organized chaos of end-of-day activities. Formations dismissed, soldiers heading to chow, the machinery of military life grinding forward. Kira walked back toward her barracks, her hands in her pockets, her expression neutral. To anyone watching, she was just another soldier heading back to her room after a long day. No one was watching closely enough to see anything different. The barracks room was exactly 8 feet by 12 feet, a single bed with a thin mattress, an olive drab wool blanket, a wall locker with a combination lock, a small desk with a reading lamp, one window that looked out over the motor pool. Everything regulation, everything precise. Kira had arrived 6 hours ago, and the room already bore the marks of her occupation. Not personal effects, there were none of those. But a particular kind of order that went beyond military standards into something closer to geometry. The bed was made with hospital corners so tight a quarter would bounce off the surface. The wall locker was organized by item type, then color, then frequency of use. Her combat boots sat side by side beneath the bed laces, tucked inside, positioned exactly parallel to the bed frame. There was only one object in the room that didn't belong to the United States Army. It sat on the desk under the glow of the reading lamp, small, circular, frayed at the edges. A patch roughly 3 inches in diameter. The image depicted a stylized phoenix wings spread wide, rendered in muted gray and black threads. Below the phoenix, stitched in subtle, dark silver, were 2 Latin words: Fides and tennis, faith in the signals. Kira sat at the desk and looked at the patch for a long moment. Her expression was unreadable, but something moved behind her eyes. Memory, perhaps, or ghosts that refused to stay buried. She reached out and touched the patch with one finger, tracing the outline of the phoenix's wing. The threadwork was worn smooth in places. This patch had been carried for a long time. It had seen things. After 30 seconds, she pulled her hand back and turned her attention to the simulation rifle resting on the desk. The weapon was polymer and metal, designed to fire non-lethal marking rounds that would trigger sensors in the training vests. It weighed the same as a live M4 carbine. It handled the same. For all practical purposes, it was the same, except it wouldn't kill anyone. Probably. Kira began the ritual of disassembly. Her hands moved with the kind of smooth efficiency that comes from 10,000 repetitions. Press the takedown pin, separate upper and lower receivers, remove bolt carrier group, field strip complete. She laid the components out on the desk in perfect alignment. Then she reached into her gear bag and pulled out a small cleaning kit. The work began. She cleaned each part, not with haste, but with deliberate, meditative focus. The carbon scoring on the bolt carrier group, the dust in the trigger assembly. Each imperfection was noted and removed. This wasn't about maintenance. The rifle was already clean. It had been inspected and certified by the armorer that morning. This was about something else. This was about reaffirming control over her tools, about reconnecting with the physical reality of her profession, about finding the still point in a world that was loud and chaotic and often unjust. The rifle didn't lie. The relationship between a firing pin and a primer was a constant. It was truth distilled to its purest form. As she worked, her mind was not on Holloway or his taunts. It was on the shoot house. She replayed the holographic building layout in her memory, not as a floor plan, but as a series of interconnected problems. Geometry and timing, angles and vectors. She visualized the fatal funnels from the perspective of an entry team. Doorways where attackers would be silhouetted against light. Corridors that created kill zones. Rooms with only one exit. Then she flipped the perspective. Now she was the defender. Where would she position? How would she use the geometry to her advantage? What angles would force the attackers into predictable patterns? She mapped ricochet angles off steel walls. She calculated how sound would propagate through confined spaces. She identified likely positions for IED triggers based on natural choke points. The building in her mind became a 3-dimensional chessboard. Every square had value. Every move had consequences. She wasn't preparing for a fight. She was preparing to solve a problem. The human element, Holloway's swaggering pride, Brennan's nervous laughter, Sullivan's casual cruelty, was just another variable in the equation. Unstable, yes, but predictable in its instability. Men like Holloway followed patterns. They always did. The rifle came back together with a series of precise clicks. Upper receiver mated to lower. Bolt carrier group locked into place. Charging handle seated. The final click was sharp and definitive in the quiet room. Kira picked up the Phoenix patch. The fabric was soft between her fingers, worn smooth by time and handling. She had earned this patch in a place where silence was survival, where the only thing that mattered was finding the signal in the noise, where getting it wrong meant people died. She placed the patch back in its small protective case and stowed it in her footlocker beneath her spare uniforms, where no casual inspection would find it. The preparation was complete. She was calibrated. Tomorrow the machine would be tested, and she would find out if Holloway was smart enough to recognize the difference between a clerk and something else entirely. Probably not, she thought. They never were. Dawn came to Fort Bragg like a held breath. The sky shifted from black to gray to pale blue, and with it came the sounds of a military installation waking up. Diesel engines coughing to life, boots on pavement, distant voices calling cadence. The staging area of Training Facility 7 was lit by harsh sodium lights that turned everything the color of old bones. The air was cool, hovering just above 50 degrees, and carried the smell of gun oil, concrete dust, and the particular anxiety that preceded live exercises. It was 0600 hours. Master Sergeant Garrett Donovan stood at the front of the staging area, arms crossed over his chest, watching the trainees assemble. His uniform was immaculate despite the early hour. His boots reflected the sodium lights like black mirrors. His expression was the neutral mask of a man who had run this drill 1,000 times and would run it 1,000 more. Behind him, the shoot house loomed, 4 stories of steel and concrete and plywood painted in dull gray that absorbed light rather than reflected it. The structure was modular, reconfigurable, capable of mimicking any building anywhere in the world. Today, it mimicked hell. The trainees arrived in small groups, carrying their simulation rifles, wearing their tactical vests with sensor arrays that would register hits. They moved with the kind of nervous energy that came from knowing they were about to be tested and having no idea if they would pass. Kira Ashford arrived alone. She had been awake since 0430. She had run 5 miles. She had eaten exactly 400 calories. She had checked her gear 3 times with the kind of methodical precision that would have satisfied an aerospace engineer. Now she stood slightly apart from the other trainees, her rifle held in a low-ready position, her eyes on Donovan, waiting for instructions. Holloway arrived with Brennan and Sullivan flanking him like wingmen. He was talking, his voice carrying across the staging area, even though he was making no particular effort to project. "First day separates the wheat from the chaff," he was saying. "You'll see who's got what it takes and who's just filling a slot." His eyes drifted toward Kira as he said it. Not directly looking at her, just making sure she was in his peripheral vision, making sure she knew he was talking about her without giving her anything actionable to report. It was a technique he had perfected over 15 years, the art of the plausibly deniable insult. Donovan's voice cut through the morning air like a blade through silk. "Listen up." The conversation stopped. 24 trainees snapped to attention, not because the position had been called, but because Donovan's tone suggested it would be wise to pay close attention. "Final evaluation exercise," Donovan began. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "Ambush scenario. Hostile count unknown. IED threat confirmed. Rules of engagement are simple. Survive." He let that word hang in the air for a moment. "This is not a scripted drill. The aggressor team has been given free rein to engage you however they see fit. They will not play fair. They will not give you time to think. They will exploit every mistake you make." Several trainees shifted their weight. One in the front row swallowed hard enough for the sound to be audible. "Alpha team," Donovan continued reading from his tablet. "Holloway, Brennan, Sullivan, and..." He paused, his finger hovering over the screen. "Ashford." The name dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. "Staff Sergeant Ashford, you're on point." The reaction was immediate. Half the trainees turned to look at Kiera. The other half turned to look at Holloway. Point position was the highest risk slot in a stack. First through the door, first to engage any threats. First to die if something went wrong. Assigning it to the smallest person in the class, the only woman, was either an act of supreme confidence or deliberate sabotage. Holloway's jaw tightened. A vein pulsed in his temple. "Sir." Donovan looked up from his tablet. "Problem Sergeant Holloway. With respect, Master Sergeant point position requires the most experienced operator in the stack. It's a critical..." "I'm aware of what it requires, Sergeant. That's why I assigned it to Staff Sergeant Ashford. She's qualified." "Sir, I just want to make sure..." "Make it work." Donovan's voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. The 3 words carried the weight of 34 years in uniform and a dozen combat deployments. "Is that clear, Sergeant?" Holloway's face flushed red, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. But he knew when he was beaten. Crystal clear, Master Sergeant. Outstanding. Alpha Team, you have 15 minutes to prep. Move. And the trainees dispersed to check their gear load magazines, adjust sling tension. The staging area filled with the mechanical sounds of weapons being made ready. Kira moved to a corner of the area and began her own prep. She checked her magazine seating. She verified her optic zero. She adjusted her vest to ensure the sensors had clear line of sight. She did all of this without looking at Holloway, but she was aware of him. The way a deer is aware of a wolf, constant, peripheral, a threat that required monitoring but not direct engagement. Across the staging area, Holloway stood with Brennan and Sullivan. His voice was low, but it carried just far enough for Kira's trained hearing to pick up fragments. Making us all look bad, he was saying. Combat Master certified, 15 years and some clerk. Brennan, looking uncomfortable, shifted his weight. Drake, maybe we should just focus on the point. No. Holloway's voice was hard. In the house, when she freezes, everyone will see the truth. She doesn't belong here. Sullivan nodded, always eager to agree with whoever was in charge. We'll be fine, Sarge. We've got this. But Brennan was looking at Kira now, watching the way she moved through her gear check. There was something about her movements, an economy of motion, a precision that suggested deep familiarity rather than nerves. I don't know, man, Brennan said quietly. That wire trap yesterday. She saw it before any of us. Holloway's hands shot out and gripped Brennan's shoulder hard enough to make the younger man wince. Luck, that's all. When the lights go out, we'll see what she's really made of. 15 minutes passed like 15 seconds. Donovan's voice called out across the staging area. Alpha Team on me. The four of them moved to where Donovan stood at the entrance to the shoot house. The steel door was painted the same dull gray as the rest of the structure. Above it, a red light glowed, indicating the course was hot. Donovan looked at each of them in turn. When his eyes landed on Kira, they lingered for just a fraction of a second longer than the others. Point position is about reading the environment before the threat reads you, he said, his voice pitched low enough that only Alpha Team could hear. You know this already. Kira met his gaze. Yes, Master Sergeant. Good. Show them what right looks like. No dramatic speeches, no inspirational talks, just professional respect between two people who understood the work. Donovan stepped back and keyed his radio. Control, this is Donovan. Alpha Team is entering the box. Start your clock. The red light above the door turned green. Execute, Donovan said, and Alpha Team entered the darkness. The north corridor was 40 meters of industrial nightmare. Steel walls painted flat gray, concrete floor, exposed pipes running along the ceiling. Doors on both sides evenly spaced, each one a potential threat point. The lighting was dim, provided by caged bulbs every 10 feet. Just enough to see, not enough to feel comfortable. Kira took point position, her rifle up in a compressed ready. Behind her, Holloway moved into the number 2 slot, then Brennan, then Sullivan at the rear. The stack formation was textbook perfect on paper. In reality, it was a powder keg with a lit fuse. Move, Holloway hissed into his radio. We're exposed in this corridor. Kira ignored him. She maintained her pace steady and controlled her eyes, scanning the environment in a pattern that covered high-low center, then back to high. Her rifle muzzle tracked with her eyes always oriented toward the greatest potential threat. She noted the dust patterns on the floor, the way air moved through the space suggesting ventilation or open doorways ahead, the acoustic properties of the corridor, the way sound would bounce and distort. At the first door junction, she raised her fist, the universal signal to halt. What? Holloway's voice crackled with irritation. Why are we stopping? Kira knelt, her left hand hovering above the floor near the door frame. She didn't touch anything, just observed. The dust pattern was disturbed here, a faint scuff mark, and there, barely visible in the dim light, a shadow that shouldn't exist. She pointed without speaking. Brennan, watching from the number 3 position, saw it. A pressure plate hidden beneath a loose floor tile. Connected to it, almost invisible, a wire running along the base of the doorframe. Holy shit, Brennan breathed. Trap. Kira moved around the trigger point, her movements careful and precise. She examined the mechanism from a safe angle, then looked back at the team and gestured for them to follow her path, giving them the safe route. They bypassed the trap without incident. Holloway said nothing, but his jaw was clenched so tight the muscles stood out like cables. They continued down the corridor. The next junction came up fast. Another door, this one closed. Kira approached her rifle oriented on the door, her body positioned at an angle that minimized her silhouette. She paused, listening. Through the steel door, she could feel a faint vibration, low frequency, consistent. It could have been machinery. It could have been a generator for the building systems, or it could have been something else. Move, Holloway commanded, his patience exhausted. It's clear. We saw it on the schematics. Just a mechanical room. Now breach and continue. Kira held her position, her head tilted slightly, processing information. I said move, Staff Sergeant. Holloway's voice was rising now, discipline eroding under stress and frustration. Kira opened her mouth to speak, and that's when Holloway made his choice. He pushed forward, his bulk crowding the narrow corridor. I'll do it myself. Can't trust amateurs to make decisions. His shoulder brushed past Kira, forcing her to step aside or be bowled over. He gripped the door handle, his rifle held, one-handed sloppy technique born from anger rather than training. Sergeant, wait, Brennan started to say. Holloway kicked the door open and charged through. The moment his boot crossed the threshold, every sensor in the shoot house screamed to life. A high-pitched alarm blared. Red lights on Holloway's vest lit up like a Christmas tree, cascading from his chest to his shoulders to his back. The door frame flashed with simulated explosion markers. A recorded voice boomed through the overhead speakers, mechanical and without emotion. Pressure-activated mine. Alpha team is KIA. Return to start. The lights came up to full brightness, harsh and unforgiving. The simulation was over. They had lasted 4 minutes and 37 seconds. They were all dead. The staging area felt different now. The sodium lights were the same. The concrete was the same. But the atmosphere had shifted from nervous energy to something closer to shame. Alpha team stood in a loose cluster, removing their gear. Brennan moved slowly, methodically, his face carefully neutral. Sullivan kept glancing at Holloway, looking for cues about how to react. Holloway himself was a study in barely contained rage. His helmet came off with enough force to crack the chin strap. He threw it onto the equipment bench, where it skidded and fell to the ground. No one moved to pick it up. His face was flushed red, a vein pulsing at his temple. His hands shook slightly, though whether from adrenaline or anger was impossible to tell. He spun on Kira, who was calmly removing her own gear, her movements unhurried and precise. What the hell was that? His voice was loud enough to carry across the staging area. Loud enough for every trainee who was waiting for their turn to hear clearly. Kira looked up at him. Her hands continued their work, unclipping magazine pouches, checking equipment for damage. You froze, Holloway continued, taking a step closer. You hesitated at that door, and your indecision got us all killed. Kira set down her vest with careful precision. When she spoke, her voice was level, calm, the kind of calm that made Holloway's shouting seem even more unhinged by contrast. The trigger was motion-activated, Sergeant. Speed of entry was irrelevant. The trap engaged the moment the threshold was crossed. Bullshit! Holloway jabbed a finger toward her chest, close enough to be aggressive, not close enough to make contact. You held us up. You created confusion. If you'd moved when I told you to, we would have been through before it armed. The arming sequence was instantaneous. There was no delay. You're making excuses. Holloway's voice was getting louder, his control slipping. You hesitated because you were scared. You didn't have the stones to make a decision, and that got us killed. Brennan, standing slightly behind Holloway, opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it. His loyalty to his sergeant warred with what he had actually witnessed in the corridor. Sullivan, reading the room, chimed in. It was confusing in there, Staff Sergeant. Hard to know what was happening with you blocking the view. It was a carefully crafted lie, just plausible enough, just vague enough. Holloway seized on it. Exactly. You're a liability, Ashford. You don't belong here. This isn't some corporate diversity program where everyone gets a participation trophy. This is about life and death, and you just proved you're not capable of operating at this level. This was the escalation, the shift from mockery to direct professional accusation, from questioning her presence to questioning her competence. It was sabotage dressed up as legitimate concern, and overhead the cameras were recording every word. Kira looked at the finger pointing at her chest, then back at Holloway's face. Her expression didn't change. Her breathing didn't change, but something in her eyes shifted. A focus, a calculation. Your assessment is noted, Sergeant. The words were perfectly correct, perfectly professional, and completely empty of deference. She turned and walked away, heading toward the equipment cleaning station on the butter side of the staging area. Her gait was even, her shoulders relaxed. She gave no indication that the confrontation had affected her in any way, leaving Holloway standing there fuming, his accusation hanging in the air with no target to land on. It was worse than if she had argued, worse than if she had defended herself. Her complete lack of engagement made his rage look impotent, made him look small, and that more than anything else was unforgivable. From the gantry observation platform above the shoot house, Master Sergeant Donovan watched the scene play out. His arms were crossed, his expression was thoughtful. Next to him, Captain Vincent Merrick had just arrived, coffee in hand, ready to observe the training. "Thoughts?" Merrick asked quietly. Donovan was silent for a long moment. Then, "Holloway just made a critical error." "How so?" "He attacked her publicly, created a record, and she documented it by not reacting." "Smart play." Merrick sipped his coffee, watching Kira clean her rifle with methodical precision 30 feet below. "You think she's baiting him?" "I think she's doing her job, and his ego can't handle it." "What do you know about her, Garrett?" Donovan's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Enough to know we should watch this situation carefully." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I can give you right now, sir." Merrick studied his senior NCO for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Understood. Keep me informed." "Roger that, sir." Below, Holloway was gathering Brennan and Sullivan, his voice low and urgent. Planning something, plotting, and Kira Ashford cleaned her rifle, her movement steady and sure, as if none of it mattered at all. But in the back of her mind, a file was updating. Incident 3. Escalation pattern confirmed. Subject, Holloway demonstrating classic narcissistic collapse behavior. Public accusation made. Witnesses present. Recommendation, continue observation. Correction phase imminent. The announcement came at 1400 hours. All trainees were to report to the briefing hall for final evaluation instructions. The message came over the base-wide announcement system, crackling through speakers mounted on poles throughout the facility. By the time 0430 rolled around the next morning, every trainee knew what was coming. The ambush scenario. The culmination of 3 weeks of training. The scenario that would determine who passed and who went home. The briefing was short. Donovan stood at the front of the room, his tablet in hand, his expression giving nothing away. "Final evaluation begins at 0600 tomorrow. Ambush scenario, no briefing, no intelligence package, no objective. Your only goal is to survive." He let that sink in for a moment. The aggressor team will be composed of instructors. They know every tactic you've been taught because they're the ones who taught you. They will exploit every weakness. They will not give you time to think. They will not go easy on you. A ripple of nervous energy moved through the room. "This is where we separate those who can operate under extreme stress from those who cannot." Questions. No one spoke. What question could you ask about an ambush? By definition, you wouldn't know what was coming. Alpha Team. Donovan continued reading from his list. "Holloway, Brennan, Sullivan, Ashford. You're first in the box. 0600, don't be late." The briefing ended, the trainees dispersed, and in the barracks that night, no one slept well. Kira sat at her desk, the phoenix patch in front of her. She didn't touch it, just looked at it in the dim light from her reading lamp. Faith in the signals. The words meant something specific, a reminder that in chaos, in the noise and confusion of combat, there were always signals, patterns, information. You just had to be calm enough to see them. She had learned that lesson in a place where mistakes meant body bags, where the signal in the noise was the difference between going home and going into the ground. Tomorrow she would demonstrate that lesson to people who had forgotten it, or never learned it in the first place. She placed the patch back in its case and began her final preparation. Field strip the rifle, clean every component, reassemble, function check, do it again. The ritual centered her, reminded her that machines were predictable, physics was consistent. The relationship between action and consequence was a law, not a suggestion. Outside her window, Fort Bragg settled into its nighttime routine. The sounds of the day faded into the quiet hum of a military base at rest. Somewhere in another barracks, Holloway was planning, plotting, convincing himself that tomorrow would be his vindication, that tomorrow would prove he was right and she was wrong. He had no idea what was coming. None of them did. The staging area at 0545 was almost silent, the kind of silence that comes before violence, before testing, before truth. Alpha Team assembled in the dim pre-dawn light. The sodium lamps cast everything in shades of yellow and gray. The shoot house loomed behind them, dark and waiting. Kira arrived first. She had been awake since 0300. 5-mile run, weapons check, gear inspection, mental rehearsal. She stood near the equipment racks, her rifle held in a low-ready position, her eyes on the shoot house entrance. Her breathing was slow and controlled. 4 counts in, 8 counts out. Heart rate 70 beats per minute. Holloway arrived with Brennan and Sullivan. His eyes were bloodshot, suggesting he hadn't slept well. His movements were jerky, aggressive, fueled by something that looked like caffeine and felt like desperation. He walked past Kira without acknowledging her, went straight to the gear wall and began checking his equipment with unnecessary force, slamming magazine pouches, yanking on sling adjustment points. Brennan watched him nervously. "Drake, you okay, man?" "I'm fine." Holloway's voice was tight, just ready to get this over with. Sullivan, always eager to lighten the mood, forced a laugh. "We got this, Sarge. Easy day." But his voice had a hollow quality, like someone trying to convince himself. Donovan emerged from the instructor office at precisely 0600. Behind him came 3 other instructors, all wearing the black fatigues that marked them as aggressors for this exercise. Kira recognized them immediately. Instructor Cade Rutherford, former Marine Recon, 6'2", 205 pounds. Specialty room clearing under low light conditions. Instructor Miles Kincaid, former Ranger, 5'11", 190, specialty close quarters grappling and weapon retention. Instructor Jackson Nash, former SEAL, 6 feet even, 195, specialty ambush tactics and asymmetric warfare. 3 of the best instructors Fort Bragg had. 3 men who had forgotten more about CQB than most soldiers would ever learn. They would be the hunters in the box. Alpha Team would be the prey. Donovan approached the team, his tablet in hand. "Alpha Team, you're entering through the north corridor. The course is hot. The aggressors are already in position. You will encounter hostile action at an unknown time and unknown location. Your goal is simple: survive." He looked at each of them in turn. Pointed position is critical. Point reads the environment, identifies threats, sets the pace. The team follows Point's lead. Is that clear? "Yes, Master Sergeant," they responded in unison. Donovan's eyes found Kira. He held her gaze for just a moment. There was something in his expression. Not quite approval, not quite concern, something else. Recognition, perhaps. "Point sets the pace," he repeated quietly just for her. "Trust your training." "Yes, Master Sergeant." He stepped back and keyed his radio. "Control, this is Donovan. Alpha Team entering the box. Time hack 0603. Execute." The red light above the shoot house entrance turned green. "Move out," Donovan commanded. Alpha Team moved to the door. Kira took point position. Holloway fell in behind her, close enough that she could hear his breathing. Brennan and Sullivan completed the stack. The door opened onto darkness, and they entered. The corridor swallowed them whole. 40 meters of steel and shadows. The only light came from caged bulbs every 10 feet, each one creating pools of yellow light separated by gulfs of darkness. The air was cool and still, carrying the smell of concrete dust and gun oil. Kira moved forward in a compressed, ready position, her rifle up her body, angled to minimize her profile. Behind her, Holloway's breathing was loud in her ear, transmitted through the radio net. "Fast." Shallow stress breathing. "Move faster," he hissed. "We're exposed." Kira maintained her pace. Steady, controlled. Her eyes tracked in a pattern. High, low, center, high. Her rifle muzzle followed her eyes, always oriented toward the greatest potential threat. They reached the first junction, a T intersection with corridors branching left and right. The holographic map had shown this junction as a critical decision point. Kira raised her fist. The signal to hold. She knelt, scanning both directions. The dust patterns suggested recent activity to the left. To the right, nothing. Just empty corridors stretching into darkness. Left was the trap, right was the path. She started to signal right, and that's when the world ended. The lights died. Not gradually, not with warning, just click, and the entire corridor plunged into absolute darkness. The kind of darkness that exists deep underground. The kind where you hold your hand in front of your face and see nothing. For exactly 1 second, there was silence. Then the strobes hit. Red lights mounted in the ceiling began flashing in rapid pulses. Half-second intervals. On, off, on, off. The effect was disorienting, turning continuous motion into a series of frozen snapshots like watching a flipbook of violence. Smoke grenades detonated from hidden vents in the ceiling. Gray smoke billowed down, filling the corridor, reducing visibility to nearly zero. The stuff was thick chemical designed to choke and blind. And then came the explosion. A simulated flashbang detonated at the far end of the corridor. The sound was a physical thing, a wall of noise that hammered into their chests. 110 decibels of pure chaos. The flash was bright enough to leave afterimage even through closed eyelids. Alarm klaxons began screaming, a wavering, piercing shriek that made thought almost impossible. It was sensory overload by design, a deliberate assault on every input channel. Sight, sound, smell, touch, everything was noise. Everything was chaos. And in that chaos, training either held or it didn't. Contact front! Holloway's voice was barely audible over the klaxon. He spun his rifle, coming up, but he was firing blind. Panic firing. His muzzle swept wildly, looking for a target he couldn't see. Brennan stumbled backward, disoriented by the strobes. His shoulder collided with Sullivan, and both men went down in a tangle of limbs and slings. From the smoke to the left, a figure emerged. Instructor Rutherford moved like a predator. Fast, smooth. His rifle was up and tracking. He found Holloway in the strobing light and fired. The simulation round hit center mass. Holloway's vest lit up red. The sensors registered a fatal hit. Eliminated, the overhead speakers announced in that mechanical voice. Rutherford shifted targets. Brennan was trying to untangle himself from Sullivan. Easy target. 3 rounds to the chest, red lights. Eliminated. Sullivan managed to get his rifle up, but Instructor Kincaid was already there, emerging from the smoke on the right. A quick grappling technique weapon stripped away simulation knife to the ribs. Eliminated. The entire sequence had taken 4 seconds. Alpha Team was dead, all except one. Kira Ashford had moved the moment the lights died. Not forward, not back, but to the side, into the corner, near the entry door, pressing herself into the deepest shadow. In the space between strobe pulses, she vanished into the darkness. Her breathing remained controlled. 4 in, 8 out. Her heart rate stayed at 72 beats per minute. In her mind, chaos became data. Strobe frequency 0.5 seconds. Means 0.2 5-second darkness in windows. Use them. Smoke density, 40% visibility at ground level, 10% at eye level. Stay low, sound alarm masks footsteps. But air displacement remains. Feel the movement. Team compromised. Expected, I'm alone now. The thought came to her, clear and cold. A memory from training that felt like yesterday. When chaos comes, become the eye of the storm. Instructor Rutherford, having neutralized Holloway and Brennan, turned to find the 4th target. His rifle swept the corridor. He expected her to be with the team, in the stack, following doctrine. She wasn't there. He moved forward, his eyes scanning through the strobes, trying to find her through the smoke. Kira exploded from the shadows. 2 seconds. Her left hand came up and cupped his elbow. Weapon control. She redirected the barrel of his rifle skyward, away from her body, negating the threat. Her right hand pushed on his shoulder, using his forward momentum against him. She pivoted on her back foot, a perfect circle, geometric and precise. His 205 pounds of muscle redirected into the steel wall with a hollow boom that echoed even over the klaxon. Before he could recover, her palm heel struck the brachial nerve cluster on the side of his neck. The blow was surgical, precise. His right arm went numb instantly. The rifle clattered to the floor. 1, she whispered to herself. Total time, 2 seconds. Instructor Kincaid heard the impact. He spun, trying to locate the threat his rifle sweeping. He was fast, aggressive, trained. Kira was faster. 3 seconds. She stepped inside his reach, collapsing the distance before he could bring his weapon to bear. Her body was close enough to his that his rifle became useless, too long to maneuver in close quarters. She hooked his lead leg with her own, applied pressure to his hip. Not a throw, a fall, controlled, using gravity as a weapon. Kincaid hit the concrete hard. The impact drove the air from his lungs with an audible whoosh. Before he could recover, the muzzle of her simulation rifle tapped his helmet. Eliminated. 2, she said. Total time. 3 seconds. Instructor Nash was the most experienced of the three. A SEAL with 15 years in the teams. He heard his teammates go down and immediately reassessed. This wasn't a panicked trainee. This was something else. He kept his distance, patient, his rifle up and ready. He moved laterally, trying to flank using the smoke and strobes for concealment. "Where are you?" he muttered to himself. 4 seconds. Kira had dropped to the ground the moment she neutralized Kincaid. Below the smoke line, below his sight line. She moved through the chaos like smoke herself, using the strobe darkness to relocate. Nash tracked left, expecting her to flank right. She came from his right, her hand clamped down on the receiver of his rifle. Weapon control first. Always weapon control first. Her other hand secured his wrist thumb on the pressure point, applying a rotational lock. Physics, leverage, anatomy. His wrist had a breaking point. His body would contort to avoid that breaking point. She applied steady pressure, and his body did exactly what physics demanded. He rotated, dropping to one knee, his weapon now useless. "Yield," he said, tapping the ground twice with his free hand. 3, Kira said. Total time, 4 seconds. The strobes continued their maddening pulse. Red light, darkness, red light, darkness. The smoke swirled through the corridor, thick and gray. The alarm klaxon screamed on. And in the center of it all, Staff Sergeant Kiera Ashford stood at a loose ready position, her rifle held correctly, her breathing controlled, her heart rate never rising above 75 beats per minute. Around her lay 3 instructors, not dead, not even injured, just neutralized, comprehensively and efficiently removed from the equation. Total engagement time from first contact to last 9 seconds. The overhead speakers were silent for a long time. 15 seconds, then 20. Finally, Master Sergeant Donovan's voice came through, and for the first time in 34 years of service, he sounded genuinely surprised. "Clear. Exercise complete. All personnel stand down." A pause, Vishram. "Staff Sergeant Ashford, that was textbook perfection." The lights came up to full brightness. The alarm cut off. The smoke began to dissipate through the ventilation system. And in the gantry observation platform high above, Captain Merrick stood with his coffee, forgotten in his hand, staring at the monitors in absolute silence. "Garrett," he said quietly, "what the hell did we just watch?" Donovan was reviewing the footage, playing it back frame by frame. "That, sir, was a master class in threat neutralization. She took down 3 instructors in 9 seconds. Yes, sir. Without firing a shot. Yes, sir. Who is she?" Donovan looked at his commanding officer for a long moment. Then he reached for his tablet and pulled up a file marked with red classification banners. "Sir," he said carefully, "I think you need to read this." The staging area had transformed into something closer to a crime scene than a training facility. The overhead lights were harsh and unforgiving. Every surface seemed harder, every shadow darker. The air itself felt different, charged with the kind of tension that precedes storms or violence. Alpha Team was supposed to be removing their gear in silence, processing what had just happened in the shoothouse. But silence was a fragile thing, and Sergeant Wade Holloway had never been good at preserving fragile things. His helmet hit the equipment bench with enough force to crack the composite shell. The sound echoed across the staging area like a gunshot. Every trainee who was waiting for their turn stopped what they were doing and turned to watch. Holloway's face was the color of raw meat. A vein pulsed at his temple in rhythm with his heart rate, which had to be pushing 140. His hands were shaking, trembling with a cocktail of adrenaline and rage, and something deeper, something closer to fear. He had just watched his entire worldview collapse in 9 seconds. Kira stood 15 feet away at the weapons cleaning station. She had removed her tactical vest and was methodically field stripping her rifle. Her movements were calm and precise. Each component came apart with practiced efficiency. Bolt carrier group, charging handle, buffer spring. She laid them out in perfect alignment on the cleaning mat. She didn't look at Holloway, but she was aware of him the way you're aware of a rattlesnake coiled 3 feet from your boot. Holloway turned on her with the kind of sudden movement that made Brennan take an involuntary step back. His voice came out too loud, pitched high with stress, carrying across the staging area and into the observation areas beyond. "What the hell was that?" Kira looked up from her rifle. Her hands continued their work, picking up a bore brush, running it through the barrel with long, even strokes. "You hesitated." Holloway continued, his voice getting louder with each word. "You froze at the entry point. You created confusion. And you got lucky that the instructors were focused on us first." He took 2 steps closer, close enough to be confrontational, not close enough to make physical contact. "In a real scenario, your cowboy bullshit would have gotten us all killed. You broke every protocol. You abandoned your team. You operated like you were alone in there." Kira set down the bore brush. She looked at him directly now. Her eyes were calm, analytical, the kind of calm that made his shouting seem even more unhinged by contrast. "I was alone in there, Sergeant. The team was eliminated in 4 seconds. Because you created chaos. The chaos was environmental. Strobe smoke, explosives, standard ambush conditions. The team's response to those conditions resulted in their elimination." Brennan, standing behind Holloway, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. His eyes kept darting between his sergeant and Kiera, his loyalty warring with what he had actually witnessed in the corridor. Sullivan, always the follower, found his voice. "It was hard to see what was happening, Staff Sergeant. The smoke, the lights, we couldn't track friendly positions. The lie was carefully constructed, vague enough to be plausible, specific enough to sound like legitimate concern. Holloway seized on it like a drowning man grabbing driftwood. Exactly. You had no communication, no coordination. You disappeared into the smoke, and we had no idea where you were or what you were doing." He jabbed his finger toward her, not quite touching, but aggressive enough to make his point. "You're a liability, Ashford. This isn't some feel-good program where everyone gets a trophy for trying. This is life and death, and you just proved you don't have what it takes to operate at this level." It was masterful in a way. Take her success and reframe it as failure. Take her survival and call it luck. Take her competence and name it recklessness. And do it publicly with witnesses so the narrative would spread. Kira held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Long enough to show she wasn't intimidated. Short enough that it couldn't be called a challenge. "Your assessment is noted, Sergeant Holloway." The words were regulation perfect, professionally appropriate, and completely devoid of any acknowledgement that his assessment had merit. She turned back to her rifle and resumed cleaning. The dismissal was absolute. Holloway stood there for a moment, his fists clenched at his sides, that vein still pulsing at his temple. He had thrown everything he had at her, and it had landed on empty air. She had made him look small without saying a single confrontational word. He turned on his heel and stalked toward the far side of the staging area, where Brennan and Sullivan hurried to follow. From the gantry platform above, Master Sergeant Donovan watched the entire exchange. His arms were crossed over his chest. His expression was unreadable. Captain Merrick stood beside him, tablet in hand, reviewing the shoot house footage for the 3rd time. "He's going to escalate," Merrick said quietly. "Yes, sir, he is." "Should we intervene?" Donovan was silent for a long moment. Then, "No, sir, not yet." "Why not?" "Because Staff Sergeant Ashford is documenting this. Every word, every action. She's building a record." Merrick looked at his senior NCO. "You know something I don't, Garrett." "Yes, sir, I do." "Are you going to tell me what it is?" "Not yet, sir, but soon, very soon." Below, on the far side of the staging area, Holloway had gathered Brennan and Sullivan into a tight huddle. His voice was low and urgent, but the acoustics of the space carried fragments up to where the officers stood. "File a complaint," Holloway was saying. "Official, through channels, reckless endangerment, failure to communicate, created a fatal situation." Brennan's voice was uncertain. Man, I don't know. The footage is going to show, the footage shows chaos. We were there. We know what happened. Our testimony carries weight. Sullivan nodded eagerly. He's right, Tad. We're witnesses. We saw her operate recklessly. But she survived. She took down 3 instructors. Luck, Holloway snapped. Pure luck. And luck isn't tactics. We file the complaint tonight, before they review all the footage, before the narrative gets set. Brennan looked physically ill, but he was a corporal and Holloway was a sergeant. The weight of rank was a heavy thing. Okay, he said, finally his voice barely audible. Okay. On the gantry, Merrick's jaw tightened. He's going to file false charges. Yes, sir. And you're going to let him. Yes, sir. This better be worth it, Garrett. It will be, sir. Trust me. Kira finished cleaning her rifle. The components went back together with precise clicks. Upper receiver to lower. Bolt carrier group locked in place. Charging handle seated. She performed a function check, then racked the weapon and placed it in the storage rack. She picked up her tactical vest and walked toward the exit, moving past groups of trainees who stepped aside to let her pass. Some looked at her with newfound respect. Others with confusion. A few with outright hostility. She acknowledged none of them. At the exit, she paused and glanced back at Holloway's group. They were still huddled together, plotting, planning. She had seen this before. Men who couldn't process their own inadequacy, transforming it into someone else's fault. It was predictable, almost boring in its predictability. She pushed through the door and walked out into the October morning. The sun was higher now, burning off the pre-dawn chill. Fort Bragg was in full operation mode. Soldiers moving between buildings, vehicles on the roads. The organized chaos of a military installation doing its work. Kira walked back toward her barracks, her hands in her pockets, her expression neutral. To anyone watching, she was just another soldier heading back to her room after a training evolution. But in her mind, files were updating. Patterns were being confirmed. Timelines were being calculated. Incident 4. Public accusation of incompetence. Witnesses present. Subject Holloway demonstrating escalation of hostile behavior. Predicted action. Formal complaint within 24 hours. Recommendation. Prepare evidence package. Await institutional response. The system was about to correct itself. She just had to give it the opportunity. The company headquarters building was a squat 2-story structure that had been built in the 1970s and maintained through sheer institutional momentum. The interior smelled like old coffee, copy machine toner, and the particular brand of bureaucracy that existed only in military administrative offices. It was 2,200 hours. Late enough that most of the day, staff had gone home. Early enough that the duty personnel were still fresh and alert. Sergeant Wade Holloway pushed through the main entrance with Brennan and Sullivan trailing behind him like remoras following a shark. He moved with purpose, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on the admin desk, where a young specialist sat reading a maintenance manual and trying not to fall asleep. I need to file a formal complaint, Holloway announced. The specialist looked up startled. Sergeant, it's pretty late. Can this wait until... No, it cannot wait. This is a safety issue, time sensitive. Get me the forms. The specialist hesitated for a moment, then recognized the look in Holloway's eyes. The kind of look that suggested arguing would be a bad career move. He pulled open a desk drawer and retrieved a sheaf of forms with UCMJ, Article 138, Complaint Against Superior, printed across the top. You'll need to fill these out completely, Sergeant. And you'll need witness statements if... I know what I need. Holloway snatched the forms and moved to a desk in the corner. He pulled out a chair with enough force to make it scrape across the tile floor. Brennan and Sullivan took up positions on either side of him, uncomfortable but committed. Holloway clicked a pen and began writing. His handwriting was surprisingly neat for someone so agitated. Years of military paperwork had trained him to be legible, even under stress. He filled in the header information with practiced efficiency, his name, his rank, his unit. Then he reached the section marked Nature of Complaint and paused. For just a moment, something flickered across his face. Doubt, perhaps, or recognition that he was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Then he thought about the shoot house, about 9 seconds, about 3 instructors on the ground, about a woman half his size making him look like an amateur in front of the entire course. The doubt vanished. He began to write. Staff Sergeant Kira Ashford, while serving as point element during final evaluation exercise, dated October 14th, did operate with complete disregard for team safety and established tactical protocols. His pen moved faster now, the words flowing like he had rehearsed them, which he had, multiple times, in his head, building the narrative. Subject Ashford abandoned assigned position without communication, creating confusion and eliminating situational awareness for the remaining team members. Subject Ashford's movements were erratic and non-standard, consistent with panic response rather than trained tactical procedure. Subject Ashford created multiple crossfire situations that in a live-fire environment would have resulted in fratricide. Subject Ashford's survival of the scenario was coincidental rather than skillful, resulting from the aggressor team's focus on eliminating other team members first, thereby providing time and opportunity that would not exist in actual combat conditions. He sat back and read what he had written. It was good, professional. It hit the right notes of concern for safety and adherence to standards. It was the kind of complaint that couldn't be dismissed out of hand. It was also a complete fabrication. Witness statements, the admin specialist called out from across the room. You'll need corroborating testimony. Holloway looked at Brennan and Sullivan. Get over here. They moved to the desk. The specialist provided them with blank statement forms. They sat down, pens in hand, staring at empty spaces that needed to be filled with words. Brennan's pen hovered over the paper. His hand was shaking slightly. Just write what you saw, Holloway said, his voice low. The confusion, the lack of communication, the chaos she created. Drake, Brennan said quietly, the footage is going to show smoke and strobes and chaos. Our testimony provides context. We were there. We experienced it. We're witnesses to what actually happened. Sullivan was already writing, his pen moving quickly. He had always been good at telling people what they wanted to hear. ICE Specialist Reese Sullivan was present during the ambush scenario on October 14th. Staff Sergeant Ashford's actions created confusion regarding friendly force positions. In the smoke and limited visibility, I had no awareness of where she was located, creating a potential crossfire situation. He signed it with a flourish and pushed it toward Holloway. Brennan stared at his blank form for another 30 seconds. Then, with visible reluctance, he began to write. I, Corporal Tad Brennan, observed Staff Sergeant Ashford during the exercise. She did not communicate her position after the ambush was initiated. This created difficulty in maintaining team coordination. It was more carefully worded than Sullivan's statement. Less accusatory, but it still supported Holloway's narrative. He signed it and slid it across the desk without making eye contact with anyone. Holloway gathered the forms into a neat stack. He walked back to the admin desk and placed them in front of the specialist with the kind of finality that suggested a decision had been made and there was no going back. Timestamp these. Make sure they go into the system tonight. Captain Merrick needs to see them first thing in the morning. The specialist took the forms, glanced at the content, and his eyes widened slightly. Sergeant, this is a pretty serious, just do your job, specialist. Roger that, Sergeant. The specialist stamped the forms with the date and time. October 14th, 2200 hours. He placed them in the intake box for command review. Holloway stood there for a moment looking at the forms in the box. A small part of his brain, the part that still remembered what integrity felt like, was screaming that this was wrong, that he was lying, that he was destroying someone's career to protect his own ego. But that part of his brain was small and getting smaller. He turned and walked out of the building, Brennan and Sullivan following behind. Outside, the night air was cool and clear. The base was quiet, most personnel already in their barracks or off duty. Streetlights cast pools of yellow light across empty sidewalks. What happens now? Sullivan asked. Now we wait, Holloway said. Merrick will see the complaint in the morning. He'll have to investigate, and when he does, our statements are on the record. 3 against 1. Brennan said nothing. He just stood there looking at the ground, his hands in his pockets. You did the right thing, Tad, Holloway said, clapping him on the shoulder. We're protecting the integrity of the course, making sure standards don't slip. That's our duty as NCOs. But his voice had a hollow quality to it, like someone trying to convince himself of something he didn't quite believe. They separated and headed to their respective barracks. Holloway walked alone, his boots echoing on the pavement, his shadow stretching long under the streetlights. In his barracks room, he sat on his bed and stared at the Combat Master certificate hanging on the wall. $2,000, 2 weeks of training, a piece of paper that said he was an expert. He had built his entire identity on that piece of paper and others like it. Awards, badges, credentials that told the world he was somebody, that he mattered, that he was skilled. And then a woman half his size had taken down 3 instructors in 9 seconds and made all of it look like participation trophies from a child's soccer league. He lay back on his bed and stared at the ceiling, waiting for sleep that wouldn't come. 5 buildings away in her own barracks room, Kira Ashford sat at her desk. Her datapad glowed softly in the darkness. Her fingers moved across the screen with practiced precision. She opened her secure log and began a new entry. October 14th, 22:15 hours. Anticipated formal complaint filed. Subjects Holloway, Brennan, Sullivan. Predicted charges: reckless endangerment, failure to communicate, violation of tactical protocols. She paused, considering her next words. Assessment: false accusations designed to deflect from subject Holloway's performance deficiencies and protect professional reputation. Standard pattern for individuals exhibiting narcissistic collapse behavior. She switched applications and opened her evidence file. It contained 16 synchronized camera angles from the shoot house exercise, high-definition footage from every possible perspective, 4 helmet camera feeds showing team-eye view of the entire engagement, audio recordings from all 4 radio channels, biometric data from the training vest showing heart rates, stress indicators, movement patterns, time-stamped analysis highlighting every decision point, every action, every consequence. She had known this was coming, had prepared for it. Documentation was defense. Evidence was armor. She created a presentation file and began assembling the data into a comprehensive package. Video synchronized with audio. Overlays showing tactical positioning. Analysis breaking down each second of the 9-second engagement. It took her 40 minutes to complete. When she was done, she had a file that would destroy Holloway's complaint so thoroughly that he would have no credibility left to stand on. She saved it with encryption and titled it simply, Evidence Package, United States vs. Holloway. Then she opened one more file, the restricted one. The one with the red classification banners. She read through it once, confirming the details were current, confirming the authorization was still valid, confirming the command chain was properly established. Everything was in order. She closed the file and shut down the datapad. Outside her window, Fort Bragg slept. Soldiers in barracks, instructors in their quarters. A base at rest, unaware that in the morning everything would change. Kira picked up the Phoenix patch from her desk. She held it in the dim light, tracing the outline of the wings with one finger. Faith in the signals, she said quietly to the empty room. Tomorrow the signals would be very loud indeed. The conference room was designed to be intimidating. Long polished table, high-backed chairs, fluorescent lights that turned everyone's skin the color of old paper. One wall was floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the training complex. The other walls were bare except for the required photographs of the President and the Secretary of Defense. It was 0900 hours exactly when Captain Vincent Merrick entered the room carrying a tablet and a coffee that had already gone cold. He had been awake since 05, reviewing footage and reading statements and trying to understand how his training facility had turned into a potential incident investigation overnight. Master Sergeant Donovan followed him in, took up position against the back wall. Arms crossed. His face was carefully neutral, but his eyes were alert, watching, calculating. The participants arrived in 2 groups. Holloway, Brennan, and Sullivan entered together, moving to one side of the table. They were in fresh uniforms, boots, shined haircut. They looked like exactly what they were supposed to be, professional soldiers ready to give testimony. Holloway's face was set in an expression of grim determination. A man doing his unpleasant duty for the good of the institution. Brennan looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Sullivan looked like he was trying to remember his lines. Kira Ashford entered alone. She moved to the opposite side of the table and sat down with the kind of quiet grace that made everything she did look effortless. Her uniform was impeccable. Her hands were folded on the table in front of her. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes were sharp. focused. She looked at Merrick, at Donovan, at the three men across from her. She said nothing. Merrick remained standing. He placed his tablet on the table and looked at the assembled personnel for a long moment. This is a formal preliminary hearing under Article 32 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. He began, his voice carrying the weight of command. Sergeant Wade Holloway has filed a complaint alleging professional misconduct by Staff Sergeant Kira Ashford during the final evaluation exercise conducted on October 14th. He paused, letting that sink in. These allegations are serious. If substantiated, they could result in administrative action, removal from the course, or further disciplinary measures. This hearing will determine whether the allegations have merit. Merrick sat down and opened his tablet. Sergeant Holloway, you filed the complaint. Present your case. Holloway stood. He had rehearsed this multiple times, in his head and in front of the mirror in his barracks. He knew what he was going to say and how he was going to say it. He was wrong about a lot of things, but he was not wrong about his ability to sound convincing when he needed to. Sir, he began, his voice steady and professional. During the ambush scenario on October 14th, Staff Sergeant Ashford operated in a manner that endangered the team and violated every principle of small unit tactics I've learned in 15 years of service. He leaned forward slightly, his hands on the table, his posture suggesting sincerity and concern. When the ambush was initiated, she abandoned her position as point element without any communication to the team. We lost all situational awareness. We didn't know where she was, what she was doing, or where friendly forces were located. Her movements in the smoke were erratic and undisciplined, consistent with panic response rather than trained tactical procedure. She created multiple potential crossfire angles in a live fire situation that would have resulted in fratricide. He straightened up, his voice taking on a harder edge. Sir, I'm Combat Master certified. I've spent 15 years studying close quarters battle. I've been deployed 3 times. I know what good tactics look like, and what I witnessed in that quarter was not good tactics. It was luck. Pure luck that happened to work out in a training environment. He sat down, his piece said. Merrick made notes on his tablet. Corporal Brennan, you signed a witness statement. Speak. Brennan stood reluctantly. His voice was quieter than Holloway's, less certain. Sir, when the ambush started, it was chaos. Smoke strobes the alarm. I couldn't see Staff Sergeant Ashford after the first few seconds. I had no idea where she was positioned. That created confusion about where friendly forces were located. He sat down quickly, relieved to be done. Specialist Sullivan. Sullivan stood with more confidence. Sir, the smoke and lights made it impossible to track her movements. I was concerned about crossfire. She wasn't where she was supposed to be in the stack formation. Merrick nodded slowly. He turned to Kira. Staff Sergeant Ashford, respond to these allegations. Kira stood. She didn't lean on the table, didn't gesture, just stood with her hands loosely at her sides, her voice calm and clear. Sir, I request permission to present audiovisual documentation from the exercise. Merrick raised an eyebrow. You want to show video? Yes, sir. Complete, unedited, synchronized footage from all available cameras and recording devices. The data will address the allegations more effectively than verbal testimony. Across the table, Holloway's face went a shade paler. Merrick considered for a moment, then nodded. Permission granted. Let's see what the cameras caught. Kira moved to the wall-mounted display screen. She connected her data pad with a single cable. The screen flickered to life, splitting into multiple windows. 16 camera angles from inside the shoot house, 4 helmet camera feeds, audio waveforms, biometric data streams. This is synchronized footage from all recording devices active during the exercise, Kira said. Her voice was professional, almost clinical, like a prosecutor presenting evidence. I'll start with the team perspective, then move to overhead analysis. She pressed play. The screen filled with chaos. The helmet camera feeds showed the team's point of view as they entered the corridor, or everything was visible clearly for the first few seconds. Then the lights died. Then the strobes hit. Then the smoke. The footage became a nightmare of red flashes and gray smoke and piercing alarms. Holloway's helmet cam showed his rifle sweeping wildly. His breathing on the audio track was fast and ragged. Panic breathing. Brennan's feed showed him stumbling, colliding with Sullivan, both of them going down in a tangle. Sullivan's camera was pointed at the ceiling, completely disoriented. And then the instructors appeared. Three shadows in the smoke. Professional, efficient, ruthless. Holloway eliminated. 2 seconds. Brennan eliminated. 3 seconds. Sullivan eliminated. 4 seconds. The footage was damning. Not for Kira. For them. Now the overhead perspective, Kira said quietly. The screen switched to the gantry camera feed. The God's eye view that showed the entire corridor in clean, unobstructed geometry. This angle showed what the helmet cams couldn't. Kira's deliberate repositioning to the corner shadow the moment the lights died. Not abandonment. Tactical repositioning to the only defensive position that provided cover and observation. The three instructors entering exactly where she had predicted they would. Her position giving her perfect line of sight on all three threat vectors. The team's elimination in 4 seconds. And then her. The footage showed her 9-second engagement in perfect, devastating clarity. First contact, weapon control momentum, redirect nerve strike. 2 seconds. Second contact, distance collapse, structural disruption, ground termination. 3 seconds. Third contact, joint manipulation, submission. 4 seconds. The biomechanical efficiency was visible, even to untrained eyes. Every movement had purpose. Every strike had intent. Zero wasted motion. Merrick leaned forward, watching the footage with the focus of someone who had spent 30 years in uniform and had never seen anything quite like this. Donovan's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. Confirmation. Kira let the footage play through once. Then she brought up the split-screen comparison. Left side Holloway's testimony. She abandoned her position without communication. Right side gantry footage showing her tactical repositioning to optimal defensive angle. Left side, her movements were erratic and panicked. Right side frame-by-frame analysis showing precise controlled technique. Left side, she created crossfire situations. Right side overhead, diagram showing every engagement angle carefully positioned to avoid any friendly fire zones. Left side, her survival was luck. Right side, 9 seconds of textbook threat neutralization that would be used in training manuals for the next decade. The evidence was irrefutable. The silence in the room was absolute. Holloway looked like he had been shot. His face was ashen. His hands gripped the edge of the table hard enough to turn his knuckles white. Brennan had his eyes closed, as if hoping that when he opened them, this would all be over. Sullivan was staring at the screen in horrified fascination, finally understanding how thoroughly they had miscalculated. Merrick sat back in his chair. He looked at Holloway for a long moment. "Sergeant Holloway," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "The video evidence contradicts every element of your sworn testimony. Sir, the ground-level perspective shows panic and poor tactical response from your team. The overhead shows professional execution from Staff Sergeant Ashford." Merrick's voice hardened. "You stated she created crossfire risks. Video analysis proves she eliminated those risks. You stated her movements were erratic. Video shows precision. You stated her survival was luck. Video shows expertise I haven't witnessed in my entire career." He stood up. "This complaint is without merit. More than that, it appears to be deliberately false." "Sir." "I'm not finished, Sergeant." The room fell silent again. Merrick turned to Kira. "Staff Sergeant Ashford, your personnel file contains a restricted annex. I'm going to access it now." He tapped his tablet, entered a command, and the red security box appeared on screen. "Classified, command override required." He entered his credentials, and then he began to read. His expression shifted. Confusion to surprise to shock to something approaching awe. He read for 90 seconds without looking up. When he finally did, he was looking at Kira with completely different eyes. "Your ghost," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. From the back wall, Donovan spoke for the first time. "Yes, sir, she is." Merrick turned to his senior NCO. "You knew?" "I was briefed 3 weeks ago, sir. Phoenix Protocol required operational security." "Phoenix Protocol," Merrick repeated, still processing. He looked back at Kira. "You wrote the manual, the CQB doctrine we teach. Chapter 7, Ambush Response." "Yes, sir." You're the lead instructor for JSOC, the one who trains Delta SEALs Rangers. Yes, sir. And you've been here under administrative cover evaluating our course. Yes, sir. Merrick sat down heavily. He looked at Holloway, and now there was something close to pity in his eyes. Sergeant Holloway, do you understand what you just did? You filed false charges against the foremost expert in close quarters battle in the entire United States military. The person who literally wrote the doctrine you claim to have studied for 15 years. Holloway said nothing. There was nothing to say. Sir, Kira said quietly, there's one more element you should know. Go ahead. 3 weeks ago, JSOC received intelligence that an NCO at this facility was engaged in credential fraud and potentially selling training materials to unauthorized parties. Holloway's face went from ashen to gray. The intelligence indicated this individual claimed qualifications he hadn't earned and was supplementing his income through improper channels. She pulled up another file on the screen: bank records, email correspondence, transaction histories. Sergeant Holloway, on September 28th, you transferred the advanced training schedule and student roster to Blackstone Private Security for $8,000. Classified training material sold to a civilian contractor. The documents appeared on screen, clear, undeniable. Additionally, your Combat Master certification cannot be independently verified. The issuing organization dissolved in 2019. Records suggest the certification was purchased rather than earned. Merrick stood slowly. His face had gone hard. Sergeant Wade Holloway, you are hereby placed under investigation for violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, Article 107, false official statements, Article 134, fraudulent use of credentials, and Article 92, failure to obey lawful orders regarding classified materials. 2 MPs appeared at the door. They had been waiting outside. Corporal Brennan, Specialist Sullivan, you both signed false witness statements. You will receive Article 15 non-judicial punishment reduction in rank and remedial training. Both men nodded miserably. The MPs moved to escort Holloway out. He stood on shaking legs, his entire world collapsing around him. As he reached the door, he turned back to look at Kira. I earned my place, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I earned it. Kira met his gaze. No, Sergeant, you didn't, but you could have. The door closed behind him. 72 hours later, the parade ground at Fort Bragg could hold 1,000 soldiers in formation. This morning it held 200 assembled in precise ranks under a sky the color of burnished steel. Captain Merrick stood at the podium, his uniform immaculate, his voice carrying across the morning air without need of amplification. Yesterday, this command discovered we had been training alongside a warrior of extraordinary caliber, he began, and we never knew it. 200 pairs of eyes shifted to where Kiara Ashford stood at attention beside the podium. Her uniform was pressed to perfection. Her face was calm. Staff Sergeant Kiara Ashford is not a supply logistics specialist. She is a JSOC lead instructor, Phoenix protocol operative, and the author of the Close Quarters Battle Doctrine we teach here. Merrick paused, letting that information settle over the formation like snow. Her qualifications exceed anyone on this installation, including mine. He turned to face Kira directly. We failed to recognize excellence because it didn't announce itself, because it operated with the quiet professionalism that defines the best among us. That failure is institutional. That failure is mine. He saluted her formally, sharp, precise, superior to superior. On behalf of this command, thank you for your service. 200 hands rose in unison. 200 salutes held steady in the morning light. Kira returned the salute, her movements economical and exact. When the formation was dismissed, she walked across the base one last time. Soldiers she passed stopped and saluted. She returned each one with the same precision. Master Sergeant Donovan intercepted her near the motor pool. He extended his hand for a shake, and she took it. That performance in the shoot house, he said quietly, that's the standard I've been trying to teach for 30 years. You taught it well, Master Sergeant. Your course is sound. Phoenix protocol. Makes sense now. He smiled slightly. It was an honor watching you work. The honor was mine. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, 2 professionals who understood the work without needing to explain it. 300 meters away near the equipment storage building, a figure in corporal's rank insignia approached. Wade Holloway moved differently now. slower, humbler. His uniform bore no badges, no tabs, no combat master certification. He stopped 10 feet away and came to attention. His hand rose in a salute that trembled slightly but held steady. Kira returned it with precision. "I'm sorry, Staff Sergeant," he said, his voice rough, "for everything. You have 8 years until retirement, Corporal. Use them to be the soldier you claim to be." He nodded once, dropped his salute, and walked away. That evening, Kira's datapad chimed with new orders. S3 operations planning, deployment cycle preparation, real missions with real stakes. She opened her secure log one final time. Fort Bragg assessment complete. Training standards validated. Compromised element removed. Institutional integrity restored. The system corrected itself. Phoenix protocol effective. She placed the Phoenix patch in its protective case and packed it carefully in her rucksack. Outside, the October sun was setting over Fort Bragg, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. Soldiers moved across the base in the organized rhythm of military life, continuing forward. Kira Ashford shouldered her rucksack and walked toward the motor pool where her Jeep waited. She had been at Fort Bragg for 3 weeks. She had changed everything without making a sound. And tomorrow, somewhere else, other soldiers would train under standards she had protected. They would never know her name. They would never know what she had done. But they would go home alive because she had been there.